I want to walk you through the AP Environmental Science exam so that you know what to expect throughout the year and in May whenever you start taking the test. So this is a quick introduction to the AP test and what you can expect with the test. Throughout the year, we're going to be looking at several different units, and here's a list of those units and about how much is covered on the test. You notice it's very heavily weighted to how we use land and water, how pollution affects our planet, and how our globe is changing. On the test, 60% of your test is multiple choice. There are 80 questions, and you'll have 90 minutes to do that. The second portion of it is free response questions. That's about 40%. 70 minutes is what you'll have for that for 3 of those multi-part free response questions. So that adds up to about 23 minutes for each question. So it's really imperative that you watch your time. You can take a watch in there, make sure it's not like a digital watch or a smart watch. But if you have an analog watch, sorry, digital is fine, not a smart watch. But if you have an analog watch or if you want to take a clock in there with you, that will help you to space yourself out. You don't have to go in order on the free response. In fact, it's best if you do the non-math questions first to get those out of the way and get yourself as many points as possible, because sometimes people will get bogged down by the things that are harder or the calculations that are just time consuming, and they miss out on some points later. In fact, they found in previous tests that the least number of points were on question 4, even though it was the easiest question, because people just ran out of time. So remember, you don't have to go in order. You can bounce around and answer the questions as you find them easiest to get as many points as possible, and then go back to the hard ones. The 3 types of free response questions that you'll see, there is one where you'll be designing an investigation. There's one where you'll be analyzing a problem and proposing a solution to it. And then one where you're doing that except with calculations. Even on the calculation one, though, it's not entirely calculations. It just involves calculations. So if the calculations scare you a little bit, jump towards the part that you know, the analyzation part, the proposing a solution part, and then go back and do those calculations last. There's several big ideas that we'll run into a lot throughout the year is how energy is transferred, both energy like electricity and energy like the food that we're eating and food webs and food chains. There's interactions. The great thing about environmental science is everything is connected. Everything involves everything else. So we'll talk a lot about those interactions. Interaction between different species in the environment, and then sustainability, how we can keep the earth going throughout the coming years. Now, remember, when we're talking about free response questions, and we're going to practice this a lot throughout the year, but a couple of rules to the game. Free response questions are not an essay. This is not English or history. Think more technical report writing. It's more like a short answer. Don't just restate the question. Dive into and answer the question that's being asked. There are multiple parts to every free response question. So when you are writing, especially if you're skipping around, make sure you label and skip spaces between your answers so that you don't have everything shoved up together in one big paragraph. It's very hard for the graders to read. So make it very organized and very easy to understand what you're trying to say where. Don't answer your free response different parts in one big giant super paragraph. Put it up 1A, I'm talking about this. 1B, we're going to do this. Okay. But do write in complete sentences. For example, if they say identify the products of photosynthesis, if you just say carbohydrate and oxygen, that's one. But if you say the products of photosynthesis are carbohydrate and oxygen, then that's a complete sentence. Remember, a complete thought when you're answering the question. In the free response questions throughout the year, you will see some language that it's important to pick up on. These different parts of the question will lend themselves to answering the question in a completely different way. So for example, if they ask, what are the environmental impacts of blah, blah, blah? You can talk about biotic or abiotic factors, but don't talk about people. So if they say, what are the environmental impacts of an earthquake? You could talk about the biotic factors, how animals are displaced, how forest may be split apart depending on where the earthquake is. You could talk about abiotic factors, soil erosion, but don't talk about people's homes. That's not an environmental impact of an earthquake. Ecological is just living things. So in that case, you would take out the soil erosion, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, but not people and not your non-living things. Now, economic, that's where you talk about people, money and jobs, money and jobs. Economics, if they say what are the economic impacts of an earthquake, then you would talk about people maybe losing their jobs or losing their homes or the cost of rebuilding. Societal, social, now you can talk about humans and their impacts. Maybe the stress related to rebuilding, maybe the deaths associated with the earthquake from being crushed in buildings or whatever the case may be. Human health, you can talk about diseases, you can talk about lung cancer, skin cancer, nervous system issues, reproductive disorders, any way that the event that they're talking about or the issue affects human health. Okay. Now, in there, they're going to ask you to do something, either identify or discuss or describe. If they ask for identify, then you just need to indicate the thing. You don't have to elaborate, you don't have to explain. So for example, if we say identify when prom is, you could say prom is May 18th. I made that number up, don't put it on your calendar. Be careful not to go too far in your elaboration on identify. In fact, don't elaborate, because if you put some wrong information in your description, then it negates even if you have the correct thing. So if I said prom's May 18th, that's tomorrow. It may be May 18th, it's not, but it may be. But if I say that's tomorrow, that's not right. So then it negates the entire thing. So don't go too far on elaboration and end up negating yourselves. Describe means to provide the relevant characteristics. If there's a process, then you do the entire steps of the process, all the parts of it. So how would I buy a homecoming ticket? Well, first you go down to the office and you talk to Miss Moore, and then you hand her the money, and then she gives you the ticket. And I'm again making up scenarios, but you would go through the entire process of how you do something when you're describing. To explain, you want to explain, provide information about how or why something happens, and give some evidence, some reasoning. You don't want to just say earthquakes are bad. You want to say why earthquakes are bad. You want to do an analyzation, motivations, reasons, give some kind of a reason behind it. Don't just state something, give additional information about it. To calculate, you'll be doing possibly some algebraic expressions or rearranging a formula. You might have to substitute in numbers or convert units. Make sure you show your work. Even though you are allowed to use a calculator, and I know that you put numbers in and the numbers pop out, you need to show the process by which you put those numbers in and by which numbers popped out. So you do need to, we'll talk about dimensional analysis, we'll talk about rearranging algebraic equations. So make sure you show that work to get the credit for how that number came out, where that number came from. If you are justifying something, then you've made some kind of a claim. You have said, deforestation is bad. Cool, deforestation is bad. But if you're justifying it, tell me why, what about it? Support that claim, provide evidence, provide reasoning to support that claim. But make a claim is just making it. Deforestation is bad. You've made that assertion. There you go. Now, usually your free response question will not stop here. They might say in maybe 2A, make a claim about deforestation if it's bad or good. And then they might say justify that claim in 2B. So be aware of that. But if all they say is make a claim, stop there. The justification is probably going to come later in another part. Propose a solution. How could we stop deforestation? You need to use evidence and knowledge. Obviously, talking about Megatron coming and blowing up everybody is not a solution that's legitimate for environmental science. So it needs to be based on evidence and knowledge of the situation. So propose a legitimate solution and then describe that and back it up. When you are doing it, make sure you use very descriptive terms. For example, during an earthquake, increased pressure, not just pressure, lots of pressure, heavy pressure, built up pressure can cause the plates to slide past each other very suddenly or very rapidly or very violently. Don't just say, yeah, there's pressure and they slide. You need to be very descriptive with how you approach a topic. If there is a chemical equation, for example, photosynthesis or ocean acidification, if a chemical equation will answer the question, a chemical equation is a complete sentence. It's a science sentence. And so you can use that equation for cellular respiration or whatever to describe that process, and that is great. Save you some time. Don't answer more than what's asked. I've seen several people in our classes where I've been grading papers, they'll start off real great and they'll be describing everything wonderful. And then they go off on this like discussion of something else. And I have to count the whole thing wrong because even though they had the first two sentences spot on and correct, then they started going off into things that were not correct. And it just negated the whole thing. Also, if it asks for 2 reasons and you give 3, the grader in May is only going to grade the first 2. So if you are writing 2 and then you think of a third one that's really awesome, scratch 1 out. And they'll just read the 2 that they see, the first 2 that they come across. So it's fine to scratch 1 out and say, there's a better one, here's the better one. And make sure you answer the question that's asked. So many times I'll see people talking about maybe energy usage and how we can reduce that, and then they'll talk about pollution. And it's like, no, not how the energy pollutes the planet, but how can we reduce the amount of energy we're using? Make sure you're using it correctly. They have the example here in 2014. They asked to identify ways to reduce electricity usage, but they started talking about solar energy and alternative energy. Well, that doesn't reduce the amount of energy that we're consuming. It just provides another alternative way to get it. So make sure you are identifying what exactly they're wanting from you and answering the question that's being asked. So there's a very, very quick intro to the AP test and some hints for success with our free response questions. We'll be practicing these free response questions throughout the entire year, so I feel like you will be ready for them. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what's coming so that you're not worried about it, you're prepared for it. So if you have any questions, please let me know.